There's this wrong belief that the body parts of persons with albinism can provide some form of good luck, some kind of fortune or good luck or money, make you wealthy. And therefore, people with albinism are targeted for ritual attacks.
Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast bringing you the latest developments in the struggle against witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Throughout human history, differences have often been met with fear, superstition, and sometimes violence.
Today, we're exploring how these age-old reactions continue to impact vulnerable populations around the world.
We're honored to welcome Muluka-Anne Miti-Drummond, the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism. Her work reveals how supernatural beliefs and harmful practices continue to threaten lives in the 21st century.
From ritual attacks fueled by misguided beliefs about good fortune to accusations of witchcraft targeting society's most vulnerable, Miti-Drummond helps us understand both the scope of these challenges and the path towards positive change.
The conversation ahead touches on difficult topics, but also offers hope through education, awareness, and community engagement. We'll explore UN Resolution 47.8 and learn how nations worldwide are working to protect vulnerable populations while respecting religious and cultural freedoms.
Let's get right to this important discussion about human rights, supernatural beliefs, and the ongoing work to ensure safety and dignity for all.
Welcome to Witch Hunt Podcast. It's such a privilege to have you here today. Please tell us about your background and your current role with the United Nations.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here today and to be able to be a part of your podcast. My name is Muluka-Anne Miti-Drummond, and I am joining you today from Lusaka, Zambia. I am the United Nations independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism. It's a very long title, I always say, and it can be abbreviated to UN independent expert on albinism. So what that means basically is that I have been appointed by the United Nations to advance and promote the rights of persons with albinism throughout the world. And we can get a bit more into that later if need be.
What are some of the challenges being faced by persons with albinism?
Thanks. Obviously, since the United Nations saw it fit to have an independent expert on the rights of persons with albinism, your question is very relevant. Yes, the mandate was set up because of the human rights violations that persons with albinism face. I think I should maybe explain what I mean by persons with albinism. It's not always a term that most people use. So when we talk about persons with albinism, we're talking about people with a genetic condition, which is characterized by lack of melanin in their hair, skin, and eyes. So I think the term that most people will be aware of is the term albino, but this is a term that we no longer use because it focuses so much on the condition rather than on the person. But I do sometimes refer to that because I think once people hear that term, then they're like, okay, now I know what we're talking about. But persons with albinism is preferred because it highlights the person before the condition. So yes, there are a number of violations that persons with albinism face. First being stigma and discrimination. And out of that comes a lot of other violations of rights. So with persons with albinism, as we said, tend to look different from the general population. I should say that persons with albinism, that people with albinism of all races, of all ethnicities, all over the world. And the main characteristic is that they always appear lighter than people or their counterparts of the same race, and so they would always appear much lighter. The hair would have varying colors, but depending on a shade of blonde to maybe almost white. And this makes them stand out. The appearance makes them stand out. And because of the appearance and the differences in their appearance, they're unfortunately exposed to a lot of stigma and discrimination. And this, it manifests in different ways. It could be in relation to like accessing a job or just your interactions with society. But it goes to as far as people with albinism, unfortunately, in some parts of the world, mainly in African countries, being killed because they look different and because people don't understand the condition. And so, yes, the violations could be in relation to education, employment, equality we've talked about, Education is another one, and education is maybe because of lack of understanding of the other needs that accompany albinism and the other concerns that accompany albinism as well.
Do women and girls have more specific challenges within those challenges?
So when we look at women and girls, unfortunately, there's always a lot more challenges for women and girls in general, because you're having you're discriminated against because you are a woman, because you are female. And then you add on top of that being someone with albinism. So you've got the double discrimination. You're discriminated against because of your albinism and because you're a woman. And so we do see differences. So, for example, I've talked about killings of persons with albinism, and I haven't explained them. And the killings is because people wrongly believe that because someone with albinism looks different, because they can't understand, particularly in the African context where most people are highly pigmented, and then a child is born with albinism to parents who are both very highly pigmented, and the child is very, very pale in complexion, almost looking Caucasian. And because people cannot always understand this difference, then there's this wrong belief that the body parts of persons with albinism can provide some form of good luck, some kind of fortune or good luck or money, make you wealthy. And therefore, people with albinism are targeted for ritual attacks with the idea that their body parts can be used in ritual practices or potions to give luck. When it comes to women with albinism, it's also the body of a woman with albinism that's objectified and othered. And again, there's a superstition. So some people may believe that having sexual intercourse with a woman with albinism can cure sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV/AIDS. So unfortunately, that will lead to sexual exploitation, rape of women, girls with albinism as well, due to this very wrong belief, related to the condition.
How do we confront stigmatization?
So what is important is education, awareness raising. At the moment, albinism is it's a condition that people don't really understand, don't really know. And whenever there's something that people don't understand, they try and seek to give it another reason, another explanation. And unfortunately, that explanation tends to be based on witchcraft, based on superstition. If we could get more education, more understanding, even more visibility, because I think the other concern is also that you don't always see people with albinism. And albinism is kind of rare. So when you do see someone with albinism, it's so surprising, and you will then assume, oh, this person must be supernatural, must be a blessing, must be a curse. So I think education, first of all, is very important. Educating people on albinism. What is albinism? What causes albinism? Not that it's this superstition that you have, like it's caused by supernatural things, but it's a scientific explanation. The genetic condition is caused by both parents carrying this gene. It's basically a lack of melanin and does not give persons with albinism any supernatural powers. And when it comes to visibility as well, I think the more people get used to something the less you take away the kind of strangeness of something of the power. So when it comes to albinism, I think if we have more visibility of persons with albinism, it becomes less of something that's of an, I hate to use the word, but I can't think of a better word at the moment, of an oddity in a sense. And having persons with albinism in the media, persons with albinism in commercials, on posters, just normalizing albinism in a sense can also help to get rid of the stigma and the discrimination. The other thing that I alluded to is the specific needs of persons with albinism due to, I said, other conditions accompanying the albinism. And that's basically in relation to visual impairment. So persons with albinism have photophobia, sensitivity to the sun, will have nystagmus, the rapid eye movement from left to right. And persons with albinism will have maybe strabismus and low visual acuity as well. And I think a lack of understanding of these conditions as well adds to the stigma and discrimination. When somebody sees a person whose eyes are moving rapidly from side to side and they don't understand why the person's eyes are moving, they're more likely to attribute something negative towards it. So education about nystagmus, but also understanding that because of the low visual acuity, persons with albinism will require larger print documents, will require magnifiers and the like, and may not do so well at school because they're not being provided with the support that they need. A child with albinism is sitting in front, can't see the board. The teacher may just assume that this child is being lazy or is not intelligent. However, the child just cannot see the board, cannot read their book. And I think because of that, then stigma and discrimination also comes up with misconceptions about the intelligence of persons with albinism in parts of the world. So dealing with some of those issues as well to make sure that we're creating a level playing ground for persons with albinism. So that also helps to reduce stigma and discrimination against them when they have a level playing ground as well.
You mentioned ritual attacks. What would we need to understand about them, and how does it relate to harmful practices?
So the number of we talk about harmful practices against that cause harm to others. And sometimes harmful practices are related to thoughts, beliefs, superstitions, most of the time very wrong beliefs, superstitions, and it may even be religion. It might be witchcraft. So in the context of albinism, there are harmful practices against persons with albinism for use in witchcraft, for ritual purposes. So as I mentioned, some people wrongly believe that the body parts can provide you with good luck. And if you're someone who believes in witchcraft or ritual practices and you want to get ahead in life, you want to have some good luck, you want to have some fortune, the body parts of persons with albinism, you may be informed that you need to get the body parts of someone with albinism, in order to produce a charm or a potion or something that will give you that good luck. Of course, this is all fake. It's all wrong. And I have to mention that and be very clear that these are all wrong superstitions. But because of that, then there are now these harmful practices, abduction of persons with albinism, mutilation. We have cases of children's arms, unfortunately, being chopped off, fingers, other body parts, children and adults, but unfortunately children are disproportionately affected. And sometimes it may not even seem that hard or that bad, in the sense that, I'll give an example. We have some cases where somebody's hair was cut off, someone with albinism, their hair was cut off. And you're thinking, well, not that bad. It's not causing any bleeding. It's not really causing any pain. Your hair will grow back. But ultimately, the reason it was cut off was to be used in ritual practices. And of course, it creates that concern that, okay, today it's your hair. What is it tomorrow and the next day? And yeah, it relates to all these kind of attacks that could happen against someone with albinism.
You gave a keynote address at the International Conference on Witchcraft and Human Rights in Lancaster, England in September. What was the significance of that conference?
So the conference was very useful in highlighting a resolution that was adopted by the United Nations. And the resolution looks specifically at harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, and how states can eliminate these harmful practices. So the resolution, the full name of the resolution is the UN Resolution on the Elimination of Harmful Practices Related to Accusations of Witchcraft and Ritual Attacks. Again, another very long title. But so the resolution is multifaceted. On the one hand, it's looking at accusations of witchcraft. It's not looking at witchcraft specifically, but more the harm that's caused when somebody is accused of being a witch or performing witchcraft. And on the other hand, it's also looking at harmful practices which are related to the practice of witchcraft, or in the words that the resolution uses, ritual attacks. So ritual attacks often occur in relation to the practice of witchcraft. And there will be harmful practices like in the context of persons with albinism, mutilations, abductions, all because they're being used, body parts are being sought to be used for witchcraft purposes or ritual purposes. So yes, the resolution is broader than just albinism. It's very essential. It's very important because it deals with a lot of issues that are not currently being covered by treaties, wholly covered by other treaties or by UN, not very, very many UN bodies. So I think it's good to have a resolution that looks into that. And also just to say, I think the resolution, yes, touches on persons with albinism, but it also touches on other groups of vulnerable people, older persons with other forms of disabilities. It could be anybody that seems different, that does not meet the expectations of society. It may be that you've got epilepsy, or you have dementia, or you exhibit behavior that is seen as difficult or not conventional, and therefore you are either a witch or demon possessed, or somebody that we can potentially use for witchcraft purposes. And so it's great that it covers more than just albinism, which is what my mandate covers, but the resolution is much broader.
What does Resolution 47.8 suggest for member states? What steps is it promoting?
Yeah. So the resolution is multifaceted. I think first and foremost, it's very clear that it doesn't prohibit a belief in witchcraft. It doesn't prohibit any religious beliefs or any beliefs in the supernatural. It doesn't regulate people's thoughts or beliefs, religion. But what it does is prohibit harmful practices that are carried out because of that. I would always say that if your belief is that you need to go and dig up a particular root and drink it, and the root doesn't cause you any harm, and drink it, that's fine. If your belief is that you need to hug a tree or dance around a tree or whatever without being offensive to anyone, that is fine because you're not hurting anybody. And the resolution does not stop that. The resolution does not stop you from singing or worshiping ancestors or anything like that. It only comes into action when you harm somebody now because of that belief, or you harm somebody, kill somebody, whatever, because of that belief. So the resolution then seeks for states to ensure that they take measures to end all these kind of practices. It calls for studies on the one hand, so that there's a better understanding. What are the harmful practices? What are the beliefs and the superstitions that lead to these harmful practices? What measures will be needed to be taken? So studies are one of the areas that it looks at. It looks at laws, reviewing laws, because sometimes some countries will have laws that inadvertently maybe allow perpetrators of these to get away with killing someone because it's their religious beliefs, or the laws don't go far enough. In the case of albinism, for example, and I'll give albinism because that's where I work, that's the area I work in. Persons with albinism are often attacked in circumstances that amount to trafficking. They are lured away from their homes, taken to somewhere else, whether within the country or outside the country, and then exploited because a body part is taken, and that's exploitation. And this basically, and sometimes it involves organized criminal groups. So this basically falls within the definition of human trafficking. But laws don't always allow for attacks against persons with albinism to be seen as human trafficking, because they're looking at trafficking for the purposes of labor. You have to take me and force me to work somewhere, or you have to take me and force me into sex work or something. So the need to change laws. Some of it may also be like regulating witchcraft practices so that you make sure that people are allowed to practice and to express their belief. But in the process of those witchcraft practices, you're not allowed to harm another person. So prohibiting the possession of a body part, prohibiting the use of human tissue or organs or blood, and making sure that any witch doctor who is regulated, registered, any traditional healer, however you want to call them, does not possess a body part, is not using a human body part, is not using a human tissue, and making that clear. Because the moment your practice requires you to use a human tissue, then we know that somewhere along the line, somebody's going to be exposed to a harmful practice, which is related to your practice. And it calls on states as well to look at their own, what is the context in which they're working? So we're not looking at a one-size-fits-all, because every country will have different contexts. What is the context? And again, that goes back to the research. What is the reason why it's growing up in these practices are happening? What are the beliefs? What is the stigma and discrimination against certain people? Because we will find that in some countries, it will be older women who are being targeted more. In other countries, it will be children with disabilities. Why is that? What are the beliefs that are fueling attacks against these particular groups of people? And then make sure that you're then taking measures to prevent that. So, and then it just asks for a variety of issues. So we've talked about legal issues, but there's also community-based issues. How do you work with the community and with community leaders to demystify some of these issues and make sure that people are not being targeted and killed or hurt in the process. Working with traditional leaders, working with religious leaders in ensuring education as well.
You touched on the need for studies to happen. Why is reliable data so hard to come by?
Yeah, the problem is that a lot of these practices happen in so much secret. There's a lot of secrecy around witchcraft beliefs, sorcery, supernatural beliefs, so much secrecy. And sometimes, unfortunately, even involvement of families or people who would maybe report the crime. And sometimes they are the ones who are actually involved. And if we're dealing with accusations of witchcraft, for example, sometimes it's the family members who will accuse a child of being a witch because the child is just not behaving as they expect them to behave. And it may be that the child actually has a mental health condition and they don't understand it. So because of the involvement of family, because of secrecy, because of the stigma sometimes that's associated with it, then there's lack of reporting as well. There's lower reporting. And lack of visibility of the concerns as well, I think is not something that we talk about. Generally, the UN doesn't talk about it that much. It's great that we have a resolution now that's highlighting this. And so if something is invisible, it gets ignored, it doesn't get resolved, it doesn't get the action that it requires. And so no one's talking about it, so no one's actually looking for it. That's another concern. Or very few, actually there are people who are doing it, but very few people are actually looking for it and for the concerns. And they end up continuing to be invisible. And sometimes it's also how they are reported. If you don't specify that there was a purpose, that the purpose was related to spiritual beliefs, spiritual meaning. If you don't specify, again, going back to albinism, we have a number of cases that happen where the courts, the police don't specify that the victim was a person with albinism. Because if they do specify it, that immediately raises concerns and red flags as in, could this have been a ritual attack? But if you just say an individual was killed, we may just assume it's a normal crime. And so those get lost in the data and don't get counted. So yeah, secrecy, invisibility of the concern, involvement of family members, and just the lack of belief in witchcraft and sorcery. I'm not saying we should believe in it, but the fact is that whether you believe in it or not, people are being killed because someone out there believes in witchcraft and sorcery. And I think sometimes we just don't want to talk about it because we just feel like it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Why are we even talking about witchcraft? It's the stuff of fiction. And because of that, then we're missing out on a lot of cases. And just to reiterate, we don't have to believe in it, but people out there do. And so we have to make sure that we are responding to the harmful practices that come out of it.
And then if you go broader, what does the world need to do to implement 47.8?
First of all, recognize that people are being killed because of it. We need to start reporting. We need to start highlighting how bad the problem is. And if you're not looking for it, you don't see it. So I think we need to become more aware that these things are actually happening, highlight them, report the cases, insist on justice being done, and educate as well, because I think sometimes there's just that belief that the person was a witch. So what happens in some cases is that somebody is accused of being a witch or is accused of having caused bad luck. And so others may not want to take action because they feel that person got what was coming to them. And oftentimes, actually, they have not done anything bad or anything harmful. It's just other people who have accused them of it. So making people aware of these kind of superstitions and stigma, taking action and making the cases visible. And I think it needs to also become kind of an aggravating factor in a court case than to say, well, this was carried out because of belief in superstition. And while we're not saying you cannot have your own beliefs, you cannot kill somebody because of these beliefs. And therefore, because this was a targeted attack on this basis, we'll give it a harsher sentence or something like that. And those who have studied law, we search through legal cases on the basis of certain keywords. And I think witchcraft needs to be one of those keywords so that it's easier for us to find those cases that relate to witchcraft. I find a lot of times, because I'm looking for it, every now and then you will hear cases of this woman was killed after being accused of a witch. And the reporting sometimes actually makes things worse because they'll say, this witch was killed, or where we haven't even had a trial, we don't even know if the woman was indeed a witch. And the point being that there will be reports about somebody being accused of witchcraft and being killed, but we don't get the reports of what happened to those, to the people who killed her or him, generally her. Unfortunately, most of the time it's more women. What happened to them? Were they taken to court? Were they brought to justice? And so it creates this appearance of impunity, and almost as if justifying, okay, there are cases that are out there, and people are getting killed. We're doing nothing about it. In a sense, we're justifying these killings. And in a way, we're giving permission for people to continue doing these killings. So I think reporting not only of the accusation and the killing, or in the case of albinism, the killing of a person with albinism for ritual purposes, but also it's essential to report the prosecutions and what was the sentence. This will serve as a deterrent, and get it out there so that people can see that actually this is not acceptable, and that if you do this, you will face the full extent of the law as well. So that needs to be done as well.
And you referred to this earlier as well, but currently, instead of being an aggravating factor, witchcraft belief or wrong belief about persons with albinism is often seen as a mitigating factor.
And it's true that in some jurisdictions, it is seen as a mitigating factor, that you carried this out because you believed in witchcraft and because your beliefs, either witchcraft or your religious beliefs, and again, it feels like we're excusing this. Like, it's justifying that your beliefs, be it in witchcraft, be it in religion, be it in anything else occult, can justify you killing somebody. And I think that goes counter to what the resolution is saying. The resolution is saying that there should be no justification for harming any person on the basis of your belief. Practice your belief, but don't harm any person because of it.
Thank you. What would you like to tell us about your fact-finding travels that you've recently?
So as part of my work, I do fact-finding missions. I'm invited by the states to different countries to look into the situation of persons with albinism. And I've just come back from what we call an official country visit to the United States. I should say, first and foremost, because we've just been talking about witchcraft practices and ritual attacks, that was not the purpose. And thankfully, I did not find any cases of attacks against persons with albinism or killings against persons with albinism in relation to witchcraft at all, or any cases of killings of persons with albinism. I think if they were there, they didn't come up on my radar and may have been for other reasons, not purely related to the albinism. A lot of the things that did come up, though, there is still stigma and discrimination, even in the US. And stigma and discrimination against persons with albinism of all races as well comes up as well, and also between people of the same races. And therefore, when we look at that, we look at it as more discrimination on the basis of color. And I think that's one thing that people don't always consider. You'd consider that we're the same race, and so if I make a joke, if I discriminate against you, I'm not being racist. It's just, but if I do that, and it's because your coloring is different, then it's colorism. And that came up a bit, like the issue of colorism came up. And I think, again, the lack of understanding of albinism and the specific needs of persons with albinism. But I think what was most interesting for me and what really needs to be highlighted, I visited Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has the highest population of persons with Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. And HPS, as it's known, is a rare form of albinism that's accompanied by lung disorders, bleeding disorders as well. And persons with HPS will often need a lung transplant, especially those with a specific type of HPS. Eventually will need a lung transplant because of their lung disorders. Will have problems with bleeding because of the way the platelet is formed and not because of the lack of platelet. And that causes problems as well. And so just the idea that a lot of individuals are unable to actually access the lung transplant and the cost of getting a lung transplant and emotional, financial, other costs of getting a lung transplant, maybe leaving the island where there is no lung transplant facilities and going to the mainland. And also, I think just the lack of diagnosis as well. There's a high level of HPS, but still people with albinism being born on the island are not necessarily tested for HPS. And because of that, there are more complications that arise in future, and maybe wrong medical procedures used because you don't understand that maybe this person has HPS, and if I do this, they may actually bleed profusely. And so I have to take these steps to counter the possibility of bleeding. And, I don't need to replace the platelets because it's not about the number of platelets and the like. Yeah.
Turning back to the resolution and implementing it, one of the developments that we've seen has been the creation of the Pan-African Parliament's guidelines. Can you tell us what those guidelines are about?
Yes, so the guidelines borrow exactly the name of the UN resolution in a sense. And so it's the Pan-African Parliament guidelines on the elimination of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. These are guidelines that were adopted by, as the name suggests, the Pan-African Parliament. And they are guidelines that are directed to parliamentarians across the African continent so that they can take into consideration measures that can be used to eliminate such harmful practices. They are actually a bit more broader than the UN resolution and go into a lot more detail around the kind of the community measures and the legal measures. And also they go, so that the UN resolution is a lot briefer and may imply that this should be done. With the Pan-African Parliament, they're a bit more explicit, and they go into ideas of education, not just educating about conditions, but education around phenomena as well that may lead to attacks against people, harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft. For example, climate change-related natural disasters. So in some areas, we're suddenly flooding or experiencing some other kind of a cyclone, another kind of natural disaster, and you happen to have someone in the community that has a disability, have epilepsy, albinism, you may then think we're experiencing this bad luck because of this person. And then that person is then going to be attacked. So the need to understand for people to also be educated that this is a natural phenomenon. It's not being carried out by any human being, by any individual. And therefore, you don't need to blame it on that person and attack that person. And also just the need to include education early on. So in the school curriculum, explaining genetic conditions so that children start from early on knowing that not everybody looks like me or sounds like me and may have this difference. And so by the time they're an adult, they're already accepting of differences and less likely to see this as a superstitious thing. The Pan-African Parliament guidelines also contain a study, so it starts off with a study and then a summary with the guidelines at the back. And I think that was also useful in showing that people understand why it's such a problem and why the guidelines are being adopted. And they're not just coming out of nowhere. There's some specific concern that they are responding to. And it's hoped that the parliamentarians will use it to develop legislation and the like across the continent.
How do we help nations adopt national action plans?
So there are various national action plans. We've had national action plans around albinism and mainly aimed at eliminating these ritual attacks, so harmful practice, the ritual attacks related to witchcraft. And the national action plans are always holistic. We look at it as in it's multifaceted. The things that contribute to this position come from different areas. So we'll look at the criminal justice system and where are the failures and how can we make sure that the criminal justice system is responding to the attacks so that they can be a proper deterrent and there can be no impunity. We'll look at root causes as well. What is causing this? Education and awareness raising. What about persons with albinism may make people have this wrong belief? And like I talked about, visual impairment and all that. And so the need to ensure education, health needs and all that are being tackled with. So when it comes to the national action plans on albinism, the way we have worked is to bring together those impacted by the concerns, so organizations of persons with albinism, and then bring in government officials and any other stakeholders to discuss, first of all, what is the problem, a detailed situational analysis problem, so that we understand, rather than just assuming that these broad concerns apply to every country, what is the specific concern in our country? And now that we have the situational analysis and understand the specific concern, how do we respond to all these specific issues, root causes, and then work together with government authorities to ensure that this is then developed into a national action plan? And what is really important is that the national action plan has a budget. There's no point in having a national action plan that has no budget and can't have any impact. And related to budgeting is understanding, is the data collection. What is the extent of the problem? How many people are impacted? What kind of funding, now that we have all these different data and statistics, how much funding do we really need to respond to this group of people? And the same can be done as well for accusations of witchcraft, the development of national action plans, looking at elimination of these harmful practices. And that again would require bringing in the specific stakeholders who in this country are being accused of being witches, who in this country are being attacked for the purposes of ritual, because it won't be the same people in the same country. And I think I just have to say, I keep using witchcraft, but I think it's very important to say that the resolution goes beyond witchcraft. It also talks about religious beliefs. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see, or we separate them. We think, okay, religion is one thing, witchcraft is another thing. But what binds them together is that they're both a belief in supernatural. Without causing offense to anyone, you believe in God. God is supernatural. And so that's what binds the two issues together, that if anything that is based on the belief of something that cannot be seen, something that is supernatural, and causing harm to someone else because of that. So if you accuse a child of demon possession, you're not accusing them of being a witch per se, but you are accusing them of having supernatural powers and being able to influence the world around them. And so in a sense, you are accusing them of being a witch in a sense. So I feel like I need to highlight that, because people would think I haven't accused anyone of being a witch. But the moment you say somebody is demon possessed, it's a similar kind of thing. It's just you're using a different framework, the framework of religion, as opposed to the framework of witchcraft or occultism.
And once a national action plan is developed by a nation, how does the international community help that nation to go forward with the implementation?
So it would depend on the country and how much outreach has been done to the international community. Sometimes it's with resources, sometimes it's with technical knowledge. If a national action plan, for example, calls for awareness raising, education, that may be done within the country. People may understand the best way of ensuring the education and the awareness raising within their own context. If it calls for assistance to vulnerable groups, so for example, again, I'll go back to albinism. Because of the lack of understanding of albinism, one of the things I haven't mentioned, skin cancer. Persons with albinism are highly susceptible to skin damage due to the effects of the sun, and that includes skin cancer. And sometimes that includes other kind of bruising, spots. And you see a person with albinism that looks like that, and you believe something supernatural about them. But that appearance can also be prevented through the use of sunscreen. And in often cases, it's because the person has photoaging, has been impacted by the sun. So they have sunscreen that can prevent some of that, which also causes some superstition. So then the international community may come in with research on a condition that can help explain, or can come in with support for sunscreen or support for assistive devices. If we're talking about epilepsy, what kind of research can be done in relation to epilepsy in the country by the international community? What kind of support can be given to other children with autism sometimes? Unfortunately, maybe that you've got autism and you're accused of being a witch. And sometimes the international community can come in and provide support around that.
What should our listeners do with the information they've learned today?
Educate yourself. It's always important to read up and understand more. So for some people, it's the first time that they're hearing about the UN resolution. It's available. I would recommend reading more about it. I have tried to provide some information about it, but it's always good to read on your own. Look out for the situation. Maybe you've never thought of accusations of witchcraft or ritual attacks and harmful practices related to this. Maybe now you can do more research into it and speak up as well. So educate yourself, research, and speak up where you see some of these concerns. And sometimes I think just to be aware that it doesn't have to be as extreme as somebody being killed. It starts from small things. And often we accuse people if they're different or if they are excelling too much, especially women who seem to be doing way more than they should, might be accused of being a witch or using occult practices or using charms or whatever. I think being aware of that and questioning now and not just absorbing everything that you read and you hear and just asking what's the root cause, and if this were in another country or if this were to escalate and get worse, what could be the potential harmful practices? And I think it's useful to challenge oneself as well with our own thought processes.
And now Sarah has a special announcement.
Please join us on February 1st, 2025 at Hartford, Connecticut's Old State House at 1 p.m. for a free community history event, remembering the innocent victims of the Connecticut witch trials. It's a special 2-hour commemoration of those who lost their lives in colonial Connecticut's witch trials. Award-winning performers Deborah Walsh and Ginny Wolfe will open with a dramatic reading of The Last Night, followed by insights from the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project founders and renowned historians. We will honor the victims with a remembrance ceremony joined by State Representative Jane Garibay. Connect with fellow community members and witch trial history descendants afterward as we work together to build awareness for this crucial chapter of our history. Don't miss this powerful blend of performance, education, and commemoration that aligns with Connecticut's recent legislative recognition of these historical injustices.
Active prevention is one powerful way to help eliminate accusations of witchcraft. This past August, Dr. Leo Igwe alerted advocates from various global nonprofit organizations that an event was to take place in Nigeria called That Witch Must Die. Such an event would usually bring witchcraft accusations forth, most likely leading to the deaths of many innocent people. Dr. Igwe provided the organizations with the necessary contact information of several human rights agencies and Nigerian officials. We asked these agencies and officials to put pressure on the pastor heading the event, reminding him that it is illegal to accuse someone of witchcraft in Nigeria. It worked. Advocates from Dr. Igwe's organization infiltrated the program and reported back to our organizations that not one person was accused of a witchcraft. Many lives were saved through preventative measures that evening. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Witch Hunt.
Join us next week.
If you like what you've heard today, please subscribe to Witch Hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
Visit us at witchhuntshow.com for more great content.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.